everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Why I Love Flagler County, your local podcast spotlighting local businesses and local residents on why they love being in Flagler County. Today, I'm super excited to have my guest and a really great friend of mine, Andrea, with us today. Andrea, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I'd love for you to talk a little bit, just to get us started, on how you came to Flagler. What brought you here? I mean, I know a little bit about your story, so why don't you share just a little bit of that?
Yeah, so what brought us here? Well, so I live with my parents, and I guess you could say my parents brought us here, but it was it was really just God. Like God opened so many doors for us. We were faithful in our walk with him, and he was faithful to us in providing us the house that we live in. I think at the time we only had like 3 months to move out of the house that we used to live in St. Augustine,
Hmm.
because the family who was buying our house wanted to move in pretty quickly. So we had a very short amount of time to get out and to find a place. And we weren't even, honestly, I don't think my parents thought about Palm Coast at first. Like
Hmm.
they were still looking in St. Augustine, for different places to live. And
Hmm.
our real estate agent just kind of out of the blue suggested, like, hey, what about Palm Coast? And my dad came out here and he saw the house, he visited the house, and he came back and he was like, guys, I think we found the one. So it was definitely all God, all part of his plan for us to be here, because again, I never would have dreamed being here. um, but yeah, I love Palm Coast. It's a
That's
wonderful
awesome.
city to be in.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fun when I hear stories like that. And I knew obviously a little bit about your story because we've talked a whole bunch of times about this. But I have a similar one where like we were just looking for houses and we were down here for a week, just scouting, like vetting for houses. We'd gone to a builder. She said she had nothing for months, and we were like, okay. So we put on this offer on this really ugly house, and I was like, I hate this house so much. I was texting all my friends. I'm like, you guys have to keep us in your prayers. I hate this house. I don't want it. The next day, we get a call from the builder that there was a house available, and then actually the house that we put an offer in fell through. And I was like, this is
Wow.
the craziest timing I've ever heard of. And
Yeah.
we moved in a lot about the time that we said we wanted to move here. And it's just so fun to hear similar stories of that. Like, hey, it wasn't in our plan. We didn't know what was going on, but we put it in God's hand and he took care of us in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful how that
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
prayers work, y'all. I mean, I said
Yes.
it was ugly and I didn't want to live there. It was pretty bad. It was so much smaller than the house we have now, and the room was really small. And I don't know if you found this a common problem in the Florida houses, but the ceilings were really like short. Have you seen those houses?
No, I don't think so. Like they
Yeah,
don't have as much like depth,
yeah, like
kind of like this
my
one here.
yeah, like my ceiling is really
Mm.
high, but like I'm 5 foot, and that ceiling would maybe be like maybe 7-ish foot. So it's like
Oh,
short and it feels so
yeah.
claustrophobic. Anyways, I'm going into a rant. But it's so great to hear your story. So I'd love for you to also share. So I'll let you tell me like the exact title because I can forget. I know what you are studying, what the subject is, but what brought you into it's more like nutrition and a lot of stuff like that. Why don't you share just a little bit on what inspired you to go into that field and how has school been for you?
Yeah, so right now I'm a senior at the University of North Florida, majoring in nutrition and dietetics. And I think it probably started when my dad got sick. So he was
Mm.
diagnosed with lupus, back in 2010, 2011. So I was 9 years old when he started going to the hospital. He would like come home and not really feel well. And um, before that, he was fine. So it was like a really kind of rapid shift in his mood, in his health. And I think, as a young kid, you don't really understand those things. You
Right.
just see your parent going to the hospital and then not coming home for a couple of days. So it was like a really weird dynamic with, how we saw food after that. Like we didn't
Mm,
really eat out as much.
mm,
My mom would buy a lot more fruits and vegetables and not as many processed foods. And
mm-hmm.
again, as a kid, like I didn't know why that was. Like Tricks for Kids was taken away, Daniel's Go-Gurts were
Right.
taken away. Like it was just, it was hard. It was a hard thing that we had to do. But I think like after that and like my journey with sports, I was just so interested in why that was. Like why my dad, like why was he feeling the way that he did with his inflammation, and then how like what medications made him feel worse? Like wasn't medicine supposed to make you feel better? So like just different things like that kind of led me to wanting to learn more about nutrition, and like um, how different foods interact with your medicine, and how food can be your natural medicine, but also how you need medications for some diseases. So all that kind of wrapped into my pursuing nutrition in college.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I remember you telling me a little bit about that, and I think my mom had lupus, my grandma, my aunt. So
Yeah.
it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And I
Mm-hmm.
completely understand. It's very I don't even know the word for it, but it's a very weird feeling essentially, of
Yeah.
being so young and not being able to comprehend. And then you look back and you're like, wow, I really didn't know anything about what was going on.
Yeah.
Um, so when it comes to nutrition, I know we know you have to eat your fruits and veggies, right? You shouldn't have, like tricks for kids, you shouldn't have Danimals, things like that. But are there any like I don't know, maybe hidden secrets about nutrition that either we should have start applying or anything that you found out, you're like, oh, I had no idea. Maybe this is the cause of this, or this can help with this, or anything like that through your years of school.
Yeah, I think a very simple thing that I didn't know and that I probably should have known was that nutrition should be individualized, right? Like
Mm,
there's no right way to do
right.
nutrition because it's all based on you. Like you
Hmm.
have your own genetic makeup, and that genetic makeup can, like a diet or exercise, that can either hinder or help your symptoms, and that is not going to be the same for someone else because that person's genetic makeup is different from yours.
Hmm.
So I think it had just a lot to do with individualizing diets and in different interventions for people, because not everyone is the same.
Hmm.
So I guess just telling more people that there is no right way to do it. Obviously, there's, basic stuff that we should all know is not have a lot of sugar, not have a lot
Right.
of, saturated fat and processed foods, but you can still have those things. Like you shouldn't limit yourself just because someone said so.
Right.
So just having that like common sense, practicing moderation, and knowing that everything's individualized. One thing's gonna fit for you and not for someone else, and something that doesn't fit for someone else might fit for another person. So
Yeah. And another part of that is definitely everyone's goals are different.
yes.
For example, like my brother, he's 16, he's running track and field and cross country. He does not have the same diet as me whatsoever, right? We might be siblings, related, have similar genes, but my health goals are different from his, right?
Mm.
He needs to build up a lot of his endurance. I, however, do not run whatsoever, and I have no interest. As you know, you
Yeah.
ran with me and I died. So, like, I need to like make sure if I was in a serial killer chase, I could live, but
Mhm.
my goal is not to run 3 miles in like 10 minutes. So it's also keeping those things in mind that just because it works for someone else doesn't mean, and it doesn't work for you, doesn't mean you did something wrong.
Yeah,
Just different
absolutely.
goals, different people. It's small things like that that people find it can discouraging if they don't know, but hopefully now that they know, it's a little bit easier on them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'd love to bring this up really quick and we don't have to go too deep into it, but I remember one time we were talking about dietitian and how different groups, like different ethnic groups, how they react to different diets. Do you remember that conversation we had a little while ago?
Vaguely, vaguely. I think that
It
was
was like a
when
class you were
you
taking.
a class I was taking.
Yeah.
Vaguely,
Oh,
vaguely
okay.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you were just sharing about how different groups have different sort of diets, and because of their diets, their nutrition is completely different from other cuisines, other
Mm,
groups, stuff like that.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that was my food, health, and society class.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was interesting because there was a section in our textbook that was solely about like how basically your race and your ethnicity, where you're from, where your ancestry is from,
Mm-hmm.
can and your how your ancestors ate all that traditional food and
Mm-hmm.
dishes could potentially lead to you having chronic diseases because of what
Hmm.
they ate.
Hmm.
And then, other ethnicities, a lot of so Pacific Islanders, for example, they live by the ocean or like bodies of water. So a lot of their traditional dishes and foods had a lot more vitamins and nutrients, um, omega-3 fatty acids, just different nutrients and things that could help prevent the prevalence of chronic diseases compared to African Americans, who their ancestry was heavy in soul foods. They had a lot of salt and sugar. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think in
Right.
excess that had contributed to us having a lot more prevalence in obesity and diabetes. So it was interesting to read, and there was a lot more that goes into it. I think I just did like a surface level
Yeah, of
explanation of that,
course.
but it was interesting to read because I never really put that together. Like,
Mm-hmm.
again, how we just talked about our genetic makeup, who we are as a person, where we come from, where we
Mm-hmm.
came from, has a lot to do with, you know, whether or not we have a risk of chronic diseases, of inflammation, even like neurological disorders.
Mm.
So it's
Yeah.
just interesting how like all of that relates to nutrition.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, and I'm not saying that I'm the know-all of nutrition or anything, but there's like that. There's like I was reading up on. I told you like once a while ago, but there's something called like Asian flush. So it's like
Mm.
a lot of East Asians when they drink alcohol, they get really red. And I read somewhere, and it could be Wikipedia, so I'm not saying it's completely correct, but it was like it's basically like how our ancestors consumed alcohol is the reason we have this reaction nowadays, so many
Mm.
generations down the line. And I'm not going to get specific into it because I don't want this is no medical advice. This is not WebMD. I do not know anything, but it's interesting to learn about that. So if any of that interests anyone listening, please do your own research, I beg.
Yes.
But I think that's really fascinating to learn, and it's super helpful to learn because I know a lot of nutrition out there are diets that we see, nutritions that we see, people think it's a one size fits all, and they
Mhm.
don't realize that there's history to it and there's
Mhm.
unpacking that you can do of your own to find something that works best for you and your family and
Mhm.
your culture and your cuisine. And it the food we eat doesn't have we don't have to fit towards that food. The food should start fitting to us and how we
Mhm.
react to it. um
Mhm.
but really quick before we wrap it up, you've been in Flagler for a few years now, not super long, but not yesterday by any means. Um, but what do you like to do around Flag? Like, what would you recommend? Any groups that you recommend, or things to do, places to go, anything that you like to do?
Well, I love going on Lee Trail.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
beautiful. I need to like one day do the whole thing because I know there's more to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Lee Trail. It's just so peaceful and quiet. Sometimes it's too peaceful and quiet, and I get a little scared. But
Oh
it's
gosh.
so nice. It's so nice on Lee Trail. So I would highly recommend for anyone who likes to take walks or runs or bikes, Lee Trail.
Okay, I'll definitely have to
Yeah.
check it out. I know I've been getting some really good places recently. Like,
Mm.
I know that the young adult group that we belong to with Parkview, they go to Holland Park all the time, but I didn't know they had so many cool things over there until someone on the
Yeah.
podcast brought it up. It's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that they did more than volleyball over at Holland
Yeah.
because that's what I know our group does all the time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, well, Andrea, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate
Thank
it. I
you.
think this was a super interesting conversation, and I love
Yeah.
learning about this and then what you do and what you're studying. So, thank
Thank
you again
you.
for the time. I appreciate it. And to everyone listening, I will see you all next time. Thank you.
Bye. Thank